This conference will now be recorded.
All right, Brian, I'll turn it over to you. Brian,
are you there?
Brian, are you there? You're on mute.
Oh man, I gave that great intro and no one even heard it. I apologize for that. I was on mute. You know, 2 years into a pandemic.
You never sounded more articulate,
Brian. I'm going to use that one, by the way. Good morning, members of the ACG committee. Knock on wood, this should be a pretty straightforward meeting, assuming I can myself unmute it as necessary. Topics to discuss today. This morning, we're going to have Jane go through the status and do a quick little update on the APA audit. We're going to talk a little about our quarterly board reporting and some of the changes we made. Brian Garcia is going to provide an update, and we're going to have a recommendation to our new emeritus board member process, which is pretty exciting. The legislative session has ended, so we'll give a little update there, and pretty much only good news to report. And then we'll finish up with a quick statutory report status, which I'm happy to say everything has been being filed on a timely basis. And then as for our board membership, we often go through periods of flux where we need to get this individual appointed, or this person's leaving the board or has a conflict, and we're in good shape there too. So with that, why don't we move to the next slide and really jump in? So we have our call to order. Why don't I handle that with Tom in transition? Do we have any public comments? All right, with no public comments, we can move on to the next agenda item, the approving of the meeting minutes for January 18th, 2022. Can I get a motion on that?
So moved. Tom.
A second? Thank you,
Second,
Tom.
Lonnie.
All right, perfect. Those approve the minutes from the last meeting, say aye.
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 Hey, Brian,
Perfect.
I'm gonna abstain just because I was not at the last meeting. So.
Oh my, yes, and welcome. We should
Thank
probably
you.
have a quick introduction here. This is exciting news here. So Matthew Deaton, do you want to just introduce yourself real quickly? We're really excited to have you here today. I should have done that right at the beginning.
Of course. So Matt Dayton, I'm Undersecretary for Legal Affairs at OPM. I'm stepping in for Jeff Beckham, who has moved on up to the secretary role here and is constantly busy and never has time for anything. So I am jumping in to be on the board and also on the audit, compliance, and governance team. I'm formerly of DRS. I've worked in accounting and finance prior to that. So hopefully I can bring some expertise to help you guys out and get this keep moving in the right direction.
We are really excited to have you join. I don't know if they're going to, hopefully maybe we're going to do a kind of a Green Bank 101 with you at some point. Obviously, Matt Rinelli and I are a little biased, but anytime we can have more legal minds involved on the board, that we always see that as an added bonus. Your reputation.
I'm not sure everyone always agrees that we need more lawyers on things, so we may be the minority here.
As long as you're not charging us by the hour.
Good point.
Exactly. And Matt, in all seriousness, your reputation precedes you. We've heard great things. We're really excited to have you be involved with the organization. The Green Bank is a mission-oriented organization. We have been able to attract some of the best and brightest out of from around the world because of what we do to impact some of the negative impacts of climate change and create good paying jobs here in Connecticut. So we're excited to have you as part of the organization, and hopefully you can see some of that excitement through these meetings and when we get opportunities to talk offline.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I've looking at what you guys have put together, you guys seem to be doing good work. So I'm excited to be part of the team.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Matt. All right, let's go to the next slide, Brian. All right, we're going to discuss the APA audit with a little bit of an update there, and I'll turn it over to Jane Murphy, who will give us an update there. So we go to the next slide too.
Thank you. We have just begun our FY20, FY21 APA audit. We received the engagement letter and signed that on April 14th. We've gotten quite a large list of preliminary requests to go through, ranging from employee handbooks to internal control policies. Just about anything you could think of was in the first round that they're going to use for their planning, and everything they've asked for is in their hands right now. And we haven't gotten any follow-up questions just yet, but in an email that I sent the last thing to, he said, yes, you can pretty much assure you that we're going to be sending you yet another list of large number of requests to go through. At that point, they'll turn over to actually doing the audit after they plan things, and they'll test of some of the controls and the items that they decided were significant to take a look at. The timing is, you never really know what's going to happen with these. Some of the audits that we've had outstanding in prior years, it's taken a year to issue the audit after we have responded to the final questions. I get the feeling things have changed a little bit. We've had turnover in staff at the APA with some of the long-term members retiring, and I think they're trying to keep things a little bit smaller than they have in the past in terms of staff. We might end up with a maximum of 2 people if we're lucky. 1 is probably where it's going to be. And I get the feeling that they want to get through this stuff and spend a lot less time than they have in the past, but yet to be determined. So I would say anywhere within the next 6 months to a year, we'll be coming back with a report for what they have given us for recommendations. But so far, so good. Thank you.
So now it's Tom. Can I ask a couple questions?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So the APA audit is separate from our financial audit, which is done by an outside firm, correct?
Correct. This is the State of Connecticut Auditors of Public Accounts, and they generally do 2 years at a time. And the reports are all posted out on the State of Connecticut website. So you can get out there and take a look at any of the areas, any of the quasis, as well as any of the state agencies that have been run through the audit process with them.
So if I guess it seems redundant that we do both, right? We have the state come in, and then we have our external auditors come in. What is the purpose of the APA's audit as compared to our independent outside audit?
The APA will look at a host of things. They're not just looking at our financials and looking to opine on them. They're going through and looking at our policies for educational reimbursement, whether or not our timesheets are appropriately approved.
Yep.
They look at everything. They'll look at all of the investment contracts and whether or not things are written properly. One of the things that they had looked at and commented on in previous years was actually how do we tell how much time our Smarty inspectors are spending at each locations when they do their inspections. So they'll get down to lots of little things that a regular financial audit would not even be touched on.
Yeah, so it sounds like, and this is a good thing, it sounds like it's more of an operational and internal control audit versus kind of a financial statement audit.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I said they will look at some of the things. They do look to roll our equity, but they aren't really doing anything to the extent that we would have for an external audit. The other thing is that it is required by state statute that we have these audits done every 2 years. Any of the agencies or quads need to have them done.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that I just wanted to understand the separation between the two and any reliance the two have on each other. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, and I will say the amount of work that I feel like Jane and her team are in a continuing audit cycle, which it's almost like they could be like the post office. Like, it never ends. It just keeps coming and coming. And you know, in way, and obviously a lot of these audit requirements are healthy. They're important, and they ensure that government public dollars are being spent appropriately. But there's definitely at other times when you question the balancing of, you know, how much is being focused on ensuring that, you know, you're addressing you know, audit request information versus, you know, the continuing of the mission of the Green Bank. And it takes a fair amount of work to be able to kind of, you know, address all these, you know, audit responsibilities, and at the same time you have to keep everything going on with the day-to-day operations of the organization. Is that a fair assessment, Jane?
Yes, it is. And there's always new audits, and even with our Green Liberty notes that we just brought on board, that added another audit for us that we did not have before. So always something new to keep all of our programs in line.
And I think when the APA auditors come in, we're very different from your typical kind of state agency in a lot of ways. So it's, you know, when they get under our hood, we're kind of a unique animal, you know, and so there's that adds an additional level of kind of complexity in the back and forth. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. All right, perfect. So along those lines, the core quarterly reporting, and speaking of balance, this is an example of, you know, the Jane's team, Brian, and myself and others working with the ACG committee members to find out what's the proper balance in our reporting to the board members. You know, providing enough information that allows board members to dig into the underlying details on how we're doing and the true position of the organization, but at the same time making sure that we're really focused on the key metrics of what we should be laser focused on. So with that, let's switch to the next slide, and I think Jane and Brian are going to handle a little bit of both of this.
Great. This is Brian. I'll handle it. Jane, you could pick me up. So last time at our ACG committee meeting in January, we discussed financial reporting and the need to both first effectively communicate where we stand succinctly to the board. You know, all board members are volunteer board members. We need to be very efficient with their time. And then secondly, to provide full detail in addition to that abridged approach. So some board members might recall that before the sweeps in the fall of 2017, we provided quarterly reports, very detailed reports to the board. Following the sweeps, you know, we were just inundated with things that we had to do. So we stopped doing those quarterly reports. We're going to come back to them. That will be the detailed version. But what we wanted to do was to provide the board with an abridged version of that detailed report so that it supports specific communications. So one of the things we did between January and today is devised this reporting pyramid to help us think about the various reports that we want to put together for these key stakeholder groups. And obviously today we're going to focus on the board with a specific focus around the abridged version and developing a set of financial statements and impact reports that are succinct enough to communicate key messages. So there are 4 key messages that we believe are important for the board members to be able to communicate. So making an impact, mobilizing private investment, achieving sustainability, and monitoring the state benefit allocation. I wanted to thank Tom for working through this with us. We had a call with Tom about a month ago. I'll go through this, you know, the messages here in detail, and then the associated abridged financial report or impact report. But Tom's guidance on all of this has been really helpful ever since we met in December in thinking about this. And also want to thank Dan Smith on our team, who's been awesome in terms of pulling, you know, taking our conversations and pulling all of that into a very abridged version of the financial statements that we're going to go through. So at a high level, the first thing we obviously want to communicate is that the Green Bank is making an impact, right? I mean, we're very mission focused. We were set up for a reason, a purpose, a statutory purpose, and that we are causing measurable statewide benefits in terms of the things that we speak about quite a bit, driving more investment, creating jobs, helping consumers reduce their energy consumption and saving on energy costs. And we want to be able to communicate that based on various locational jurisdictions. So I'll show you something in a second that is a view that aggregates our data warehouse. And I want to get your feedback in terms of, what data would be useful for you all to have at your fingertips without being too onerous and too long with all the data that we capture. So that's the first thing, is that the Green Bank is making an impact for the state of Connecticut. The second thing is really the principle that green banks abide by, which is that we are mobilizing private investment. So we'll dive a little bit into an abridged version of the balance sheet, but we all know that to achieve our ambitious public policy objectives, it's not going to be on the back of ratepayers or taxpayers. It's going to be using ratepayer and taxpayer dollars in a smart way that mobilizes more private investment. So mobilizing private investment is the second key message. The third one is that we're working towards achieving sustainability. And here we've got an abridged version of the P&L. And what we're trying to demonstrate here is that we are investing public revenues, that is the Clean Energy Fund or Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative allowance proceeds, in projects that are delivering impact to Connecticut. We're managing our operating expenses and resources to deliver that impact and ultimately generating earned revenues back to the organization that are supporting the operations. So we are working towards achieving sustainability. And since the December decision in 2017 on the sustainability pathway, we've made really good progress towards that end. And then lastly is monitoring the state benefit allocation. And this is to say that, and we'll go into more detail later, that we want to track the uncontrollable personnel related OPEX that deals with the structural budget issues that Connecticut faces, the long-term retirement obligations, medical and dental healthcare benefits, and what that means in terms of adversely impacting our operating expenses. So these are the four messages that we came up with. I want to just stop here and see, get your all's feedback, or Tom, if you want to provide some context as well. But these are the things that we felt we wanted to give you some information and would be strong messages for you to be able to deliver. When you need.
Brian, it's Tom. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you guys, Jane, Dan, yourself, Brian, and Brian Farnan for all the work that went into this. Secondly, when I approached this with them, I approached it much like I do with my corporate clients, which is to understand that through our financial statements, we're providing a story, and that story has to be consumed by constituencies with different forms of expertise and different, looking at it through different lenses. You have the general public, which would kind of like to know what the board or what the Green Bank does and why it exists and whether we're successful or not. You have the legislature, which obviously has a vested interest in this, but also is looking out for the state as a whole. Hence, when they took the funds from us a few years ago, and we need to be able to demonstrate to them, here's what we're doing, here's how we return both investment capital to the state or bring investment capital to the state, here's how we fulfill our mission, and here's why, when it's appropriate, we should keep the funds. Then you have the board of directors, which obviously is responsible for management and guidance of the organization. And then you have obviously day-to-day management, which really needs to be at the more granular level. And each of those constituencies has a different prism by which they consume the information and different degree of knowledge of what our mission is, what we're trying to do, and quite frankly, experience in dealing with the various acronyms and terminologies that we may use. So when we put together the package, when we met and put together the package, it was really to how are we going to tell this story to those various constituencies. And I think to date, the team has done a nice job of putting together these reports at these various levels of detail. And I think the goal would be to live with these reports for a bit and tweak them as appropriate so we can more cleanly tell the story. So that's how I got involved. That's how I worked with these guys and ladies. And I really appreciate the effort. And I think it's come a long way in a very short period of time. And I look forward to the committee having discussions on this. And then as we move forward, tweaking these reports and utilizing them. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for that overview. That was great, Tom. Any questions, comments from the committee on these key messages? They're pretty straightforward. They're pretty powerful, right? And what we wanted to do was to arm you with a set of financials and other information to be able to support communications.
No, I appreciate it. As someone who's new to the board and this committee, the brevity of it made it simple to follow. I was able to dig in and understand, where things stood, particularly with the P&L. We were able to look and say, hey, you're making a profit margin of 3.7% for this year on actual earned revenues as opposed to public revenues, and that was a pretty powerful statement to me, at least. So I think these make a lot of sense and are good to share with people. I would just, maybe the only thing I would do is with the board is to walk them through the numbers, what these things mean, what the statements mean, just so they have a kind of high level understanding of how it works. I'm not sure if everyone has accounting or finance background necessarily on the board.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that, Matt. I think what we'll do is we're going to get into a regular cadence of a quarterly report out using the abridged version and providing the detailed version so that we can, just get the communications, have people ask questions. We can get into the detail. We can stay at the high level, whatever. We can float back and forth. We'll even have twice a year our business unit leaders of our financing programs with Mackie Dykes and our incentive programs with Sergio Carrillo kind of go through their own how are business units doing as well. So it's a good discipline that we're starting to build into our process. Everything exactly as Tom laid it out.
Yeah, and I also I think the first slide makes a lot of sense. I didn't really think about the concept of breaking it down by Senate districts or representative districts, but I think that this is definitely a tool to explain what the Green Bank is doing and showing how it impacts each representative or senator's district.
Yeah, Brian, this is Matt. I guess my comment, and for some reason I can't see the slide that Tom mentioned, but I agree that's always a good slide, and we should continue to try to serve things on our website using that GIS mapping, because it's just such a powerful tool for people who are visual. But my comment was on the P&L statement, and I am one of those people Matthew referred to who doesn't have any accounting background, but if I read it right, I'm just worried about the line margin all revenues and margin percent all revenues, which looks like we have, again, to me, being really aware of how these are read, but it looks like we have that kind of, if I understand it right, money, but a lot of that money is actually obligated, right? Is there a way to, if that's the case, to signal it so it doesn't look like, to one of our audiences, doesn't look like a big surplus sitting out there?
Yeah, I actually, that's a good point. I'm looking at it. Maybe that margin should be below total non-operating expenses. to give a little more accurate, representation of what the margin is.
And also, I mean, just maybe a footnote if it's true, because I just seem to recall a lot of, and maybe I'm wrong about this, a lot of times we would have funds on our balance sheet, but we were required to maintain those because of commitments with our financial partners. So if we're doing like a streamlined, easy to read one pager, sometimes that nuance gets lost. And I think, again, being mindful of the audiences that read it, I don't think we want to make it look like we have a lot of unallocated cash out there if that's not really the case.
Yeah,
this is Lonnie. I totally agree. Having lived through one of the big sweeps, that's exactly what happened. Was people saw, and didn't really understand that there are obligations involved. And I think it's really important to keep re-emphasizing that. Particularly, we're going to have a lot of new legislators next time out, and everybody's, it's a learning curve for everyone. So I think it's a really good idea to really be specific and make sure everybody understands those are committed.
Those are great points. I think, Dan and Jane, what we can do is create that, what we do for the Office of Fiscal Analysis, where we put the obligations on that chart, is we can put something like that here on our balance sheet, that the unrestricted assets are actually dedicated to incentives, paying bonds, those sorts of things. We'll put those on this document, so if somebody just uses this one document, it's on there. It's a good point. You couldn't see it from what we put on there.
Yeah, that is a good footnote that we have on that OFA cash flow that we have to file quarterly, and it does bring in the fact that there is over $40 million in incentives for the RSIP program that are still out there to pay probably over the next 6 years.
I agree that you should do that for something on the balance sheet. And I think on the income statement, as we discussed, I think what we want to show is we're being very efficient with the money that we do have, that we are quote unquote generating some quote unquote net income before the allocation of expenses, and then show the allocation of those overhead expenses, that employee benefits expense. It shows that we're in because of those. If not for those, management is doing a good job managing people's funds, but because of those, we still need both the cash as well as the income.
That's great, Tom. We'll work with you on that second P&L presentation to get to that point, because it ties to the final statement, which is the monitoring the state benefit allocation, which is that we don't have any control over that allocation. Just given the long-term structural issues Connecticut facing, we have to impose that value, which is so far above market that an uncontrollable personnel-related operating expense for us.
That's unique to a state entity versus if you were a private entity. And if you were a private entity, you would be seen as good financial stewards, because you're a state entity. The funds that you do generate go to this, longer term state liability.
Cool. Any other feedback? That was great. You all jumped right in. I guess the question, so you jumped into the financials, which was great. Thank you. I was going to kind of tee that up, but you all were jumping right in, which is great. On the impact stuff, yes. So what we've tried to do is to create, we collect a lot of data. We've got a really strong back-end data engine. We can pull up whatever information we want. But what we did was we can give you any time series, calendar year, fiscal year. This is Tom's district from his appointer, the minority leader of the Senate. For every board member, we've got the appointer's area. So for the governor and you, Matthew, it would be the entire state. Same with you, Lonnie. And each of our board members' appointees would have their districts here, as well as their hometown. So if you are talking to your local legislative leader, you'd have access to that data. Where we start to go too much and too overboard in our data way is, we're giving you all projects, in this district over, the last 10 years. We're also giving you vulnerable community projects. We have our vulnerable community target now of no less than 40% of investments and benefits will inure to vulnerable communities. So we thought it was important to give you that data set. But then we probably went a little overboard where we went into the sub definitions of vulnerable communities, which is, Community Reinvestment Act projects, distressed community projects. This is important to D. So you can see we can kind of give you as much data as you want. And then on the project.
So can I jump in for just 1 second here?
Yeah.
That was actually just one note from someone who hasn't seen this. One of the things that I noticed was those numbers didn't add up to the total all projects. I think that might create some confusion, without an explanation that there's overlap there.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
One thing that I'll say, and where I struggle with this a bit, and Brian, you said it, we're kind of data wonks, particularly those that kind of are working this on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is great, but there's one level down from this, which I would call the elevator pitch, right? And it's what are the 3 to 5 key stats that if you got in the elevator with the first select person of a given town or a mayor, you would want them to know what the Green Bank has done within their municipality. 3 or 5 things that's going to get them to basically say, hey, that's fantastic. I really support you guys, or let's see if we can do more. And I think that elevator pitch is what doesn't pop from all the stats. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. There's so as an example, let me try this, Tom. So today Lonnie is going to be at a governor signing of a bill in Bloomfield. And so we looked at the data for Bloomfield because the local leadership will be there. And the elevator pitch is in Bloomfield, the Green Bank has enabled, $22 million of investment, helping 500 families and businesses reduce energy costs while creating 200 jobs and reducing, 100,000 tons of CO2 emissions. So it's kind of like jobs, climate change, investment.
By the way, how much have we saved those people in their energy bills?
There we go.
Right.
That one we're working on.
Right.
Yep. Lifetime costs. It looks like we've got lifetime cost savings on here. There we go.
But you're exactly right, Brian. That's exactly what we should be arming everybody with, so they can go out to these events.
To Tom's point, we can work on some sort of automated way to get this into talking points. So a fill in the blank. There are a couple other things that we're going to add to that I think should make this a little bit easier. But
shouldn't we be able to? If we have all this on, a relational database, isn't that just like a query that you could literally
Absolutely.
click on any town and it would spit that out, or then you could drill down and like have a theme map where you could say, well, I want to turn off all the themes except, vulnerable communities. But I think that might, if we have that, I believe we have that software, automating it like that is really the way to go. And then, candidly, you don't necessarily need to spoon feed it to us and the public can get it too. If it's on our website, map of Connecticut.
Yeah, that's up on the website right now. We have an impact map, so you can filter by geography.
Right, but it should have a query, the query that were you just outlining, we can, and that's totally. your dashboard query, it spits out that elevator pitch, and then you can have the ability to drill down on the themes for the wonkier folks.
Okay. Yeah, we can work on that. That's no problem.
Cool. All right, that's great. Great guidance. Perfect. That's what we needed. All right. Unless there's any other comments on this, I think we've got great feedback. We'll fine tune this. We're going to try to give it a go with the first set in Q1, between July through September of this year. We'll report back. So we're going to give this a go coming up. Tom, I'll connect with you on just further refining the P&L.
All right, perfect. Let's jump into the emeritus. Do we need to? I don't think we. No. Yeah, we can let's jump into the emeritus now. We'll have a recommendation on that one.
Perfect.
All right. You want to handle this one too, Brian, especially with your great relationship with Kevin?
Yeah. So, per the bylaws of the Green Bank, the board can form an advisory committee at its discretion. And obviously, in an effort to engage prior board members, Emeritus, and in fact, industry and policy experts, we proposed last year. You might recall, in October of last year, we had an ACG committee meeting where we discussed this, and then the board approved it 2 weeks later at the October board meeting. But I've been remiss in the context of advancing our first Emeritus member or recommendation for consideration, which would be Kevin Walsh. So for those of you who might recall, Kevin was appointed by Governor Malloy as our clean energy finance expert. He served, for a number of years, probably 6-7 years on the board, and just provided great guidance on a number of different things, from structuring transactions to how we think about portfolio, to now with this new lens, what he's working on is infrastructure. So really what we would recommend to the ACG would recommend to the board is that our first Emeritus member would be Kevin Walsh. It would be really cool. This is an advisory role, which would mean that Bert and I, Brian, he lives in Fairfield. We could pick up the phone, say, Kevin, we're thinking about a deal. Here's some of the specifics. What are your thoughts? Or we're learning more about this area of environmental infrastructure. What do you think in terms of how the markets are perceiving this sector? So just being able to have those sorts of conversations to take advantage of his expertise. This is a resolution for an ACG committee recommendation to the board, which would be that Kevin Walsh would be the first Emeritus board member on the ad hoc committee advisory committee.
Brian, I'll say this is a great idea. We've talked a long time about leveraging our alumni a little bit, because we've had such great contributors over the years, and it's a shame to not be able to, as you say, pick up the phone or otherwise use them when we know they might be the perfect person to call for something. So I think it's a great idea. Not that everyone has to be an emeritus member, but just in general, we should be able to, maybe start thinking about compiling that list and having some sort of alumni status, or just send them emails once in a while. So I think it's a great idea. The one thing I'll say, as we embark on this new era, it dawns on me, maybe Brian Farnan, we should get ahead of it and think about what, if anything, do we have to think about in terms of ethics and other types of, non-disclosure, that type of thing. Any sort of the day-to-day stuff that we as board members all do. Do we need to think about that for these members?
Yeah, and they can avoid things like the statement of financial interest. You can think of a guy like Kevin Walsh, who probably has probably more complicated financial statements than myself, because they're not going to be actually voting on, allocations, they're not going to be an actual board member. We can avoid things like that, luckily. So we do have a little bit more flexibility here than we do with board members.
Right. And we just want to make sure, in addition, that there's just no appearance. We don't want to have anyone thinking that there's something improper. Our bylaws allow it. So I was just thinking, I don't know why, I was just thinking about that. Nothing to do with Kevin. So anyway, great. It's a great idea from my point of view. Sorry to take so much time.
I'd agree with you on the concerns with just on the ethics side. I have less of a concern with actual ethical issues and more of the what does someone run with and say, look at this, Green Bank, was engaged in this project, and look at, this emeritus member had some connection to it, even if they weren't involved in that. So I do think we want to tread a little cautiously, and maybe there's just some safeguards we can put in place to make sure that there's no actual or appearance of any ethical issue.
Yeah, no, we can definitely do that. And Kevin really hasn't played very much in the Connecticut renewable space, so it hasn't been an issue in the past. But we'll make sure we take that from a broader perspective.
Yeah, just some sort of safeguards out there, because there's obviously times where there's actual ethical issues, but it's usually more of the, hey, he's got he's involved in some project tangentially, he's not even involved with it, doing anything for us with respect to that, and we get involved in it, and then all of a sudden it becomes a story.
Yep, we can do that. And I already got a couple ideas in my head about potentially having them sign, a kind of a document similar.
Brian.
to
Yeah, Brian, I think what we do, first of all, I agree with my colleagues. Second of all, I think this is a great idea. I'm supportive of this emeritus status. Thirdly, I think Kevin is a perfect example of where we want to pick his expertise. Fourthly, as the two lawyers have said, I do think the appearance of impropriety, even more so than genuine impropriety, here is paramount. So what I would recommend is that maybe you work with maybe one of our two attorneys here and someone else and put together a document that emeritus members need to review and sign that basically speaks to this issue, whether that be called a non-disclosure agreement or what have you, but to just formally say, hey, this is how we, you're not on the board anymore, you're not going to be voting on these items, but most assuredly, we don't want to see people profiting from inside information or things of the like.
Okay. Yep. I could put something together and maybe use the existing board, Green Bank board ethics policy as a guide.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe just they'll stick with that, and or like we do at our firm, before we jump in on a matter, we say, here are the parties involved. Let us know if you have a conflict. I don't know what it is, Brian, but you'll figure it out. I just wanted to put it on the radar screen.
We'll do that.
Great.
Excellent. So we've got the resolution for the
Do
recommendation.
we need to vote here?
We do. It would be a recommendation from the ACG committee to the board, and we can probably get that paperwork done, Brian, probably between now and the next board meeting, you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we could move the motion, forgive me, Brian, is it number 2?
Yeah, it's resolution number 3 that the ACG committee hereby recommends to the board the selection of emeritus board members, and then it would be that's the resolve.
This is Matt. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tom.
No, go right ahead, Matt, please.
Yeah. So moved.
And I will second that.
All right. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
All right, excellent. Motion passes. All right. Let's move forward with the legislative update. We're going to really focus on the legislative items here. We can go to the next slide. I'm also going to have Matt Masunis provide this update. Lonnie actually was able to get it yesterday. So, and this was a successful legislative session for us. Matt Masunis, our legislative liaison, did a great job. We really went in, focused on a couple items, a couple specific items related to the expansion of our CPACE program. And we also, but why don't I turn it over to you, Matt? Why don't you spend the next 5 minutes going through these next 2 slides?
Absolutely. Thank you, General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer Farnan. And good morning, Board of Directors. While, I would credit you certainly with the eventual receding of the rising oceans, the legislature has to feel like they're doing something too. So they passed some laws. This is going to take and could take more than 5 minutes, although there was a few extra laws in addition to this that passed. These are worthy of reviewing really quick here. Every 3 years roundabouts, we try to optimize statute for the CPACE program, since it is enshrined in statute how it works. In this case, it essentially matches to our environmental infrastructure authorization, in the sense that it allows commercial properties has clean energy program to be financing climate adaptation and resilience measures, whereby the normal measure of energy savings paying off the financing is not applicable. And for specific reasons with electric vehicle charging infrastructure, the same sort of carve out was requested and granted when it comes to that, because the beneficiaries tend to be the drivers, the tenants, the workers, not necessarily the building owners who are installing the charging, where currently it can be financed as an ancillary measure. So next steps on this, we're going to be consulting with DEEP and CIRCA, the Connecticut Institute for Climate Resilience and Adaptation, to be helping us qualify in the sorts of improvement measures that could be available under such resilience financing. And important to note, it's not just ours, but something we had to remind the legislature of in terms of some of their questions during floor debates, is that this is also private capital investment between two private parties potentially, where the Green Bank is just a programmatic intermediary. Moving along, clean energy tariffs. This is a big one. It had a lot of advocacy and industry push behind it, and eventually got over the finish line with a doubling of caps for the commercial, I guess you could call it both commercial sector programs. One of them, the non-residential renewable energy solutions program, the successor to the LREC-ZREC program, if you recall that, which started just this January, and then shared clean energy facilities, centralized, in a sense, renewable power station with subscriber offtakes meant to be targeted directly toward low to moderate income beneficiaries. Doubling of both of those program caps, both of them can now qualify in larger project sizes, and various other improvements behind that. Commercial projects can now maximize roof space, for example, even if they're not sized to load anymore. In other words, they can generate a little bit of excess, or shared clean energy facilities. They tightened up the requirements for how many or how much of the subscribership would have to be low to moderate income, which gets to the original points of where should this program be directing its proceeds, which part of the population, probably the part of the population that's going to create bill arrearages that everybody pays for eventually. Moving down, that is one of the bills getting signed today that was mentioned earlier. Another one, zero carbon electric sector by 2040. This started as Governor Lamont's executive order number 3, I believe, requesting or ordering DEEP to be studying in its integrated resources plan. Can this happen? Can we fully decarbonize the electric sector by 2040? They said, yes, we can, and so the legislature did too. It's an aspirational target, but a binding one, which will be supported by continuing nuclear and offshore wind provision. Hydrogen Task Force, this is something where the Green Bank was written in as the lead on it, trying to work with ultimately a multi-state coalition in attracting federal resources here for their billions of dollars that they set aside for hydrogen hub projects. And this being a task force that runs throughout the year that will report back to the legislature at the end of the year after its study. That's going to require a new work stream at the Green Bank for a temporary stretch of time. There was a few policies passed on the grid side of things, the transmission distribution system, for example. The utilities can both own 3 battery energy storage pilots now that must be approved for cost recovery by PURA. So they'll be submitting those in once they're compelled to do so. We'll see what that looks like. There was also action from Dominion Energy, I think mostly, in terms of allowing for new nuclear in the state. Not necessarily the central station plants like Millstone, but setting the policy environment for later this decade, potentially expanding that out with small modular reactors on their footprint. Technically, they could be built elsewhere, but I think the debate was around functionally that was going to be where those things were, if they were going to be anywhere. And you know, as we need more zero carbon resources moving into the future for beneficial electrification purposes, more nuclear is the potential option that policymakers want to look at. Next slide, please. Oh, and we have some big ones. I don't know if I reserved enough time here. So we've got Senate Bill 4, the Connecticut Clean Air Act. This is omnibus legislation aimed at transportation electrification. We've been kind of comparing this almost to Public Act 1180 that formed the Green Bank, put the extra E in deep and made 100 different programs. It's not that big, but it's the biggest that we've seen for transport electrification legislation that moved through. Notably, first bullet here, over average collections from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, although this was discussed earlier, will go toward EV incentives. This is something that the Green Bank had agreed upon, and that seemed to please all the other stakeholders mightily when they were looking under the couch cushions for what's going to pay for some of these programs in terms of additional light and heavy duty and school bus electrification efforts, voucher programs, et cetera, that were authorized under the Clean Air Act. This cements in law that the over average of the last kind of rolling average of collections from RGGI, and it's on an upswing in recent auctions and is anticipated to be, we're at about 5.2 million. And that should be exceeding that easily with annual auctions on the way. And so it's a diversion of funds, but it was one that we had agreed to, and that puts the Green Bank into the policy space more firmly for electric vehicles. This is, I don't know, Jane or Brian, if you have ideas about offhand, if it was going to be like in the 8 million range for total collections or something in addition to that. But it's money that the Green Bank has not realized to date, because this is more like projected over collections into the future. And so they made us whole for what we were accustomed to in terms of our funding inflow there. So it was a fair. The cheaper program for light duty electric vehicles can now pretty much with this bill covers all the debates that have been happening that we've seen from our seat on the governance board over there over the past 2 years. So now rebates
so Matt,
available.
Classic example, cheaper. Like, you know, if we poll this audience, do people know, including staff members, what cheaper is? So we should always, this gets to Tom's, but we should always kind of, let's keep it higher. You're too smart. We need a less
acronym violation. So Connecticut Hydrogen and Electric Automobile Purchase Rebate. It was a pilot program for about 5 years. Then it was made in the 2019 budget as a permanent program. Now it has additional funding streams and is expanded for electric bicycles, as well as allowing more than 2 rebates per fleet. This is an interesting conversation point that we run into pretty frequently in consultation with towns, businesses that want to electrify, but that were limited to 2 rebates. They can now do 10 for electric vehicles. And if they serve environmental justice communities exclusively, 20 rebates for electric vehicles. So really advancing fleet electrification in the state, establishing a voucher program, the biggest for heavy duty vehicles, and the biggest point of debate with the legislature, adopting California's medium and heavy duty vehicle standard. What does California or Connecticut give up in its sovereignty there was what the naysayers were concerned about. It did end up passing, of course. And I believe that might have been a governor's bill proposal too that got incorporated in here. One of our more minor bill proposals was a scalpel approach to, we were seeing the need in the electric school bus space to allow school districts to have longer financing tenors to amortize the upfront cost of electric school buses against the longer payback but higher available payback from the maintenance and operational savings. And so instead of 5 years, they can now do 10 years to amortize electric school buses for school boards. This is mostly a third-party contracted state. Anyways, there are multiple other bills here. I won't even cover the back half of the bullet points due to time, but it pulled into this omnibus a number of legislative proposals. And then valuable funding items and bonding items in the state budget implementer, as well as articulating policy around Department of Agriculture-led climate resilience grants, which plays into our environmental infrastructure authorization, and also a few minor RPS changes in the Class 2 market to support sustainable materials management, think along the lines of trash to energy plant, anaerobic digesters, and alternative solutions to those sorts of pressing problems for the state. That'll do it for that part for me. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. And one item that we don't have included on this list is we worked hard. There was an effort related to the state contracting review board. This was something that was set up under former Governor Rowland. It wasn't really staffed. It was basically one member. There was a lot of media and political discussion about its expansion to cover municipalities, cover quasi-publics, and also to significantly boost its budget. Municipalities and the quasi-publics had significant concerns about having this additional reviewer of our contract process, because at the end of the day, we're trying to use private means to accomplish public good. We want to work at the speed of business. So we had concerns about being under their review. I mean, as you can see through our audit process between the APA audits and our other additional audits that we go through, there is already existing a very robust process for how our organization is audited, and we also have very robust governance documents, from internal controls to bylaws to operating procedures and so on and so on. So we worked hard to say this could potentially be harmful to quasi-publics, although well-intended, and that legislation moved forward with the budget support for that office so that it could accomplish its mission, but it didn't get the expansion to then also cover municipalities and quasi-publics, which we were pleased about. So with that really was the legislative session. It was a successful one. We were happy about it. And let's move forward. We've got two last slides, which I think we can handle really quickly, which is our statutory. Someday we're gonna call this the Matt Rinelli report, because this was, he was one of the main ideas behind it, and it was very smart for us to put in place. All of our reporting has been on time and been done in a timely fashion. And then if we move forward from there, next slide. Is our BOD membership, and all our positions are currently full. At some point, we may potentially, have members seek to move off, and we'll work with them in that process in an orderly fashion, and to get the replacements for them. So with that, it's 9:28. I'd be happy to give everyone back 2 minutes of their life, unless anyone has any final questions, concerns, or comments.
I just want to thank you guys for the efforts. Good meeting. I really appreciate the progress on the reporting. I think that's going to pay huge dividends in the future.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you everyone for joining us this early morning.
Appreciate it. You guys have a good rest of your day.
All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Great minds.
Yeah. Aye.
Aye.